So it's Tuesday, October 26th, 2021, and I'm calling to order the policy committee meeting. I am Roberto Rodriguez. I'm chair of the committee. Here with us today is Aura Russell-Better, District 4 representative, and Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend. First thing we'll do is approve the minutes from our September 28th meeting. Aura, if you don't mind just moving to approve them.
So moved.
And I'll second. Do we have any questions on the minutes?
No.
No questions from me either or comments. We'll approve them. If we're all in favor, we'll indicate with a raised hand. Okay, that's unanimous. And just to note on the minutes that board member Jeff Irish is no longer on the board, but he was in that meeting, so we don't have that that vote to approve them. All right. So what we'll do today, we're going to go over a series of policies that we had queued up last time. So I'll hand it over to Aaron so he can walk us through it, and then we'll continue our conversation.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah. So hoping that on this first one, we can kind of talk it through and then potentially we'll see where we're at, right? If we're ready to move the questioning and search of students forward, then we'll look at the drug and alcohol use. I think in that one, when we get there, my goal for our conversation today is to kind of get direction on it. I don't think we'll be in a place or, I don't think we're ready to move it forward to the full board, but we can talk that through when we get there. Then Javier has these student transportation policies that we'll talk about, just some of the moves to kind of get our policies in line with some of the things we need to do around transportation stuff. So we'll jump into those in a minute. And then I thought, and if this gets bumped, it's not a big deal, but just because we're headed into November, right, and kind of closing out the kind of board calendar year, just a little bit of reflection on kind of what the work was done, just to be ready for kind of the report out. So if we don't get to it for much discussion here, that's not a big deal, but just acknowledging that, thinking about what might be priorities moving forward into the coming year. But we can obviously talk about that in late November. But we won't meet again until after the 2 meetings in November. So anyway, that's why I put it on for today. So. Welcome, Javier.
Yeah.
Hello. So I know things were just kind of gotten there. So for the questioning and search of students, what we have in there is both the policy and then the procedure drafts that we started to look at last time and decided, let's pull those back because let's spend a little bit more time talking those through. So maybe if folks want to take a couple minutes to kind of get regrounded in the policy and procedure. And then we can kind of talk through what might be some of those issues, or in addition to the existing proposed changes, what else we might want to kind of contemplate before moving it forward. So would people like a few minutes to kind of open those up and kind of reground in them?
Javier?
I'm sorry, I was late. Did you guys approve the minutes?
We did, yep.
And am I taking notes?
Yeah, if you don't mind taking notes, and then when you do transportation stuff, I'll take notes. So.
Got it. I see you've already been taking notes, so.
Just trying to. Roberto, were you going to say something?
All trades here, all the trades. Just have to say that.
I was just gonna say, let's just. I have already read it, but I just wanted a couple of minutes to skim through it again and like you said, reground myself. So we can take just a few minutes for that.
Why don't people go ahead and put their cameras off, just so we know when people are ready to start to re-engage, and turn your camera back on when you're ready.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, we're all back. Let's maybe start with just the policy, just overarching, and then we can go to the procedure, just to ensure kind of consistency across them. So, so the policy itself, we had, based on our earlier work, right, had kind of flagged that, so the firearms things, and kind of at the discretion of the, superintendent, right, are kind of the two changes, right, to kind of interrupt some automatic kind of referral of things to law enforcement. So those, as you see, are the two main things, but wondering what else is kind of coming up for folks in terms of questions or wonderings about the language.
Laura, do you have an immediate question?
Do you have any? Because I'm still thinking about a couple things I wanted clarification, but.
Yeah, I guess just if you don't mind, just it's clearly having a firearm a violation is a immediate reason to call or to let law enforcement authorities know. But I'm wondering why that is the example that we use in the policy. Like it says such as. Is it, yeah. Like what's the value of having that one example there? I'm not against it. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think just because we've been flagging all along, through the federal requirements that like the firearms things are a place where we don't have discretion. So continuing to, I think we've, that was how we dealt with the weapons policy. That's come up in a variety of, kind of instances. So I would say, I don't think it had any kind of like phrase previously. Like, so it just said as required by law or as deemed appropriate by school administrators. And I know that sentence needs to be reworked. It's like confusing in terms of how it's written at the moment. So I can clean that up. But anyway.
And this may be what you're referring to, but I in my read of it, what I would prefer is to remove the at the discretion of the superintendent from the lead into may be forwarded to law enforcement authorities as required by law.
Right.
And then say with or without the firearms violation or at the discretion of the superintendent. Because one, I want to make sure that it's not, at the discretion of individual administrators and that it's also not at the discretion of the superintendent to decide whether to refer a weapons violation, that is like it's required by law.
Yeah, that's a little bit of what I was saying. Just the ordering of it is backwards a little bit. But you're proposing taking out the deemed appropriate by school administrators. Yeah,
that was the superintendent and the administrator's role was not really clear there. I don't know if you caught the way that Javier reworded it, structured the sentence, but it seemed to get at some of the confusion. Aura, do you have anything? My thoughts are more not a specific language, but just understanding how the policy would play in. So if you want to.
Yeah, so we're talking about the whole thing here, Aaron, like we're not going by section here, just anything.
Well, right now we're on the policy, then we'll flip to the procedure where we can maybe go by section. So the policy is just the one-page thing, JIH versus JIH-R.
Oh, okay, I was looking at JIH-R, so okay, I'll wait then.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of questions that I had were just like, how often? Not that we want to. I'm not asking you for you to produce this data, but just for me to contextualize. How often do we have like administrators say, "Oh, I'm not sure if this constitutes enough reason to search someone"? Like, how often are people puzzled whether there is sufficient, or are we really quick to draw that conclusion? Like, there's enough evidence here for me to warrant searching someone.
I don't know that I can quantify that, and I know you're not asking for that. I mean, I think that the standard that is used, which is reasonable suspicion, is a fairly lax standard by law. So that is, sort of been upheld in the courts as, the level, and it's specifically to say that school administrators have less of a burden of proof than the police does to be able to conduct a search. So I think it's I just want to be clear that it's a relatively loose standard for those searches. But I don't know, that doesn't answer your quantifying question. I mean, I don't think that people are searching randomly just for fun.
No, I'm sure that's not the case. I guess and I agree that it's probably really hard, probably not a fair question for me to ask. I was trying to draw the question based on such anecdotal sort of kind of stories that I've heard, which I don't necessarily have an opinion on whether it was justifiable or not. But I know that a lot of our students and staff members say that some of our restrooms have just a chronic smell of either vapes or marijuana. So any student that's in any bathroom, because of the environment smell, that could be considered, reasonable, a reasonable excuse to warrant a search. So that's a really, again, anecdotal and really specific one. But what I wanted to express was that I feel really comfortable with what we did with KLG. That really does have that overarching one that I want to grant our school staff. I want to see this from our school staff's point of view and how they how can we empower them to internally manage and take care of situations to really leave that space that KLG was meant to give them. So I don't want to make this more restrictive to them, but I also don't want to jeopardize privacy. So does that, I don't know if I'm now just kind of not saying anything. Yeah.
Well, I'll just say, when I was preparing last night, reading back through it, thinking about these issues, I was struck a little bit by just how, and it resonates from my experience as a principal, of like, monitoring, tagging in the bathrooms and, being like, just like, okay, let me see your backpack, dude, and all of those things. So it was like, I don't know that, that I was ever like hemming and hawing, but, relationships come into it. Right. But it's not always broken by search, asking to see somebody's backpack. Sometimes that produces trust. Right. So anyway, it goes lots of different ways. Right. But I was struck by this then gives leaders the authority to execute on implementing discipline, right? Or protecting the safety of the campus, right? Without requiring external, right? Because it's a pretty wide latitude in terms of the search, the parameters that are kind of given here. So I see what you're saying in terms of kind of how it's paired with KLGB in that way.
Yeah, and I think one thing that used to, I don't want to take up too much of our time, but one thing that did used to concern me or trouble me was when some of these searches would happen while we still had the SROs in the schools, and then they would be present. And that's the situation that I was afraid would escalate rather quickly, and that would take it away from our staff to manage. So not having the police presence there, as KLG kind of gives us guidance for, allows this questioning and searches to be exactly what you alluded to, Aaron, that happens within the context of us building relationships with students and creating an environment where we're also kind of trying to achieve that expectation of safety. And before that, when we had the police presence over there, I remember raising the concern of how do these searches happen? So again, I'm trying to look at it through that lens. That's what I was trying to convey.
Mm-hmm.
Aura, it sounded like you had something you were going to say, Aura.
No, what I'll say is I appreciate. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aura. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just probably nodding that was helpful context about the SRO piece. So,
yeah. I appreciate that perspective because I do think that in the context of KLB or KLG, I always get those mixed up.
KGB? No, sorry. Anyway.
that it is a different ball game to the extent that this is about maintaining safety in an environment that is not, that is not heavily policed. And I think that's really helpful for administrators to know that they have the ability to manage the safety in the building without having to be sort of tied to this is then something that leads to, a potential citation.
So let's talk about the procedure for a minute, because I think, there's some pieces there we need to clean, I think likely to clean up in terms of JIH-R. So I know you had some questions there, Aura. So do you want to start? We can start kind of, there's the introductory section. I don't know that, but why don't you go ahead?
Just jump in my question?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see the part that I think it was in some of the description about what a search entail. Let me see. Searches of students' personal property. See. Okay, so on that second page, where it talks about, so the beginning of that first sentence may include pat downs and searches of the student's outer clothes. So I like that specificity, but I think maybe even, Aaron, when you were just mentioning like about asking to look in a backpack, I guess I was just wanting to feel more clear. I heard the pat down, so that helped me picture, but just like saying a search, like how invasive, because I know there's a part about strip searches, clearly like that's a police, but I guess besides the patting, like I wanted to know if there's any other contact. Is it really just the, asking to open the backpack? Like, I think that was the part I just didn't feel totally clear.
Go ahead.
So I'm just reading it. So they may be given the opportunity to open any closed items. So it sounds like perhaps that would be first, before, like maybe the backpack, it would be like kind of giving a student the opportunity to show it. Is that am I accurate in that understanding of that statement? Yep. Okay.
And often, my practice was often, and kids were, anyway, it would be a thing, where, that we'd have them turn their pockets inside out or whatever, so that, like, those are various strategies to avoid having that physical contact necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was where I was, the pat down, that was helpful. But I guess, let me see if the language says searches may include. So I think just that says may include to me, and I don't know, Roberto or Javier, if this, if it rang true to you also, that seems like it's giving that one example, but I guess to me it's not saying that you can't do something more physically invasive than that. So that was sort of the part that felt unclear to me. Like it said that maybe, but is that trying to give latitude for more? But I guess that feels a little too vague to me.
So what's going to become the final sentence of that point, number 3, sort of kind of speaks to the broader sense of it. It says if searches produces.
Okay.
It's interesting because I think it's intended to be that that's as far as you would go, not that you would go farther than that. And I think that's, and again, this is not my, sort of area of expertise, but, like offering somebody the opportunity to open and share and turn their pockets inside out and things along those lines is the first order of business. And then the pat down would be if somebody wouldn't do that. And then, but you would never go past that. That's the highest level that you would go to.
Okay. So I think maybe that just didn't seem clear to me because it says may include. The student may be given the opportunity. I like that. That's,
So maybe flipping those around and saying something to the effect that, the student will be given the opportunity to open and close the items that are not easily accessible to visual search. If the student refuses, the administrator shall open and search the items. This may include a pat down of the student's outer clothes. So basically flipping that language there.
Yeah. I think it's just, but then it goes to, if there's a suspicion, broader search may be justified. I guess that still doesn't seem clear to me that I hear that you're saying the intent is to not do further than pat down, but the language to me.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I think it would be fine to take that language out and then just leave the part about the strip search. If it gets to that level, then that's something that would require law enforcement.
Okay. Because where my mind just went is like pat down, and then does a staff person say, what happens if they feel something? Like, are they then, reaching into a student's clothing? Like, that's where my mind went. Like, where's you do that, and then you're saying that there's not more physical contact. I think that's the part that feels not clear. So,
I think, if there is a reason if in the pat down you identify something and the student refuses to produce it, then I think you assume that it's something that they shouldn't have, and you proceed with whatever whatever the next step is. But they've passed up the opportunity to clear themselves, and I think
right. Okay. And then and I'm sorry, Aaron, I'm trying to remember the, other places I remember it saying something about witness, but is that the case here that I'm just not remembering? Where does it say that a person would also have a witness there, the administrator?
Where is that language? Yep, in number 2, so we were looking at 3, by a school administrator in the presence of a witness.
Okay, thank you. I remember it was another spot. So, okay, that's helpful too, because I think I was just picturing, does something go to the next step, and then just what happens if, that didn't feel like I felt violating to the student. That just helps me to know that there's another adult also. Okay, thank you. I think that resolves my concern about that.
So let me just clarify, the proposal is kind of moving the language about given that the student may be given the opportunity to open any closed items or items that are not easily accessible to visual search, to be the second sentence in this section, because the first sentence is, reasonably related to suspected violation and no more intrusive than necessary. Then it follows. The next thing is they're able to open things up so you can do visual inspection, and then it flows that searches may include pat downs and searches of students' outer clothes and personal belongings. But then the deleting, if the search produces a reasonable suspicion of the presence of evidence, a broader search may be justified. Right? I would agree. I don't really even know what that would mean. So
can I ask?
That sounded just too much openness about potential more search from staff. So that feels better to me.
Yeah. So can I just say, when I hear that part, I guess to me is like the most simplest example is, if someone is fearing that there's a weapon versus you think the kid has you feel like the student might have like a vape. Those are two very different reasons to escalate the search. One is a clear, threat because it's a weapon, and the other one obviously is something that's not an imminent threat. Just wanted to say that's the example that came to mind.
So, Chair, does that then feel to you? Because yes, I think I was that totally makes sense, because I was thinking of a more, less in the moment danger, right? Of say, drugs. Does that change your thinking about that language and thinking, say, it was a more immediate danger of a firearm potential? Does that to you feel like?
I think this is another one where I go back to KLG, and I know that if it's a weapon, and the need to escalate either a search or anything else, I think that we've identified that feels like it's an imminent threat. Versus if we think that a student has drugs, I don't think that we've explained that to be a threat and a call the police moment. That's more of okay, we got to figure out ways to escalate the search. Because to me, I just want to again center us that the reason that we're doing this was because we were reestablishing the relationship with law enforcement. So then we're looking at these policies as a result of that overarching policy. So I'm trying to now reassess, how do our administrators and staff go over these procedures when in the past my fear was that it would escalate really quickly to involve the police. So now, how do we allow room for the administrators to manage all the different complexities that could happen when there's any situation, be it a weapon or drugs? So I'm trying to be more, allow more room for these things to happen within the policy. Because KLG, in my opinion, just did what we all hoped it would be, which is eliminate that immediate risk of triggering, law enforcement and, again, the school to prison pipeline issues that we had identified. So I want to give administrators and I want to give the superintendent room to really for this policy. I wanted this policy to leave them room to then establish better practices to define, that imminent threat versus, a small offense, a minor offense.
So does changing that to you, superintendent and assistant superintendent, feel that still does give enough of the latitude that you're mentioning? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So we are leaving in, because it was in there, delete, supposed to be a question mark, I think, if a strip search appears to be necessary, law enforcement authorities shall be contacted.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any circumstance under which we would be conducting a strip search.
No. No.
And we know from KLG that if we're contacting law enforcement, then we're also contacting, parents and guardians. So the KLG kicks in right away.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, other questions on parts of this procedure?
The only other thing, I was not diligent looking for, pronouns and the other kind of cleaning language, but I know that's going to be, when the fine combing goes, that'll come up.
Part of our publishing routine, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all. I mean, I would assume that when we have the larger conversation with the board, some board members might want to have a little bit more information about the rest of the language here, like patrolling the parking lots, and in general, our philosophy behind, the students' rights to privacy, to their lockers and their rights. So those things might need to be reaffirmed with board members, particularly new board members. Just so that we have the context to how the rest of the policy reads and how it will function.
I was, in relation to that, Chair, going to ask, is the part about cars and searching the part, is that a change from previous or no? Okay, I just didn't know if that was added or changed anyway. So okay.
Yep, and part of the existing. Yeah, and I think an important part of it, I mean, I can think of anyway, yeah. Okay, so I hear those couple of changes, in, the end of that one paragraph in the policy, and then reordering B3 in the way we've talked about here and eliminating that one sentence. But with that, the editorial, kind of the copy editing of pronouns and board and so forth, nomenclature. I think these are then at the point, if you guys want to consider a motion to move these forward, I think, then Superintendent, you and Chair Figdor can figure out exactly how we take these up, how and when this gets taken out. But
I'm comfortable bringing this up, or if you want to move, I'll second. And yeah, I guess we'll do them individually. So if we're okay with sending this to the board, we'll vote by raising our hands. That's unanimous. And as Aaron said, we'll wait for the superintendent and Chair Figdor to figure out how they want to do the workshop and have the board discussion on the first read night. We'll probably do that with the rest of these policies, by the way.
Yeah, sure. So just moving to JICH, the student drug and alcohol use. This one requires a significant, in my opinion. So I think my goal is getting directionally from you all, members Russell, Better, and Rodriguez, kind of what you would like to see in a revision, and to then bring it back to the November meeting. So, because I do think particularly the procedure, is really ripe for an overhaul. And I attached in the board docs the kind of resources I've attached are, one, the work we did on tobacco and vaping, because it was modeled actually after the South Portland policies, which have been the ones that have been referenced to me by various kind of community health advocates, as being, kind of taking a substance use approach to this work as opposed to, a punitive and kind of discipline orientation to this. So, so I have I don't think the South Portland ones are exactly right for us. But I think they're close, given that like the first step is notifying law enforcement on JICH. So I think we've staked out some different ground in that regard. But from there, much of the substance I think is kind of consistent. I'll say, I did some work, though, it's been a challenging month to do a lot of community engagement, around other topics. We've had plenty of topics to engage around. But there's been transitions with some of the folks at Opportunity Alliance who were partners in some of the other and in the city public health department. So some of the folks have kind of moved around a little bit. So I'd asked for a little bit more time, but I think I wanted to just kind of confirm directionally where we think, we would like to see this policy go kind of broadly, not necessarily like the wordsmithing of it, but, outside of the police reference in the South Portland one, it's pretty consistent with how we laid out tobacco and vaping. And does that seem consistent with kind of your interests for the board, from the board perspective in terms of the kind of policy we'd like to advance, down the line. So that was just kind of a discussion and a chance to kind of look back at those a little bit. So not asking for any action around this one today.
I did read it, but I'm just peeking at it again. So it's fresh when your question.
And what part of the South Portland policy did you say that might not be? I think you said there was something specific that.
Well, if you're in the procedure, number one, reads, police involvement, all drugs and drug paraphernalia will be confiscated and turned over to the police.
Yeah, I didn't open up the procedures before.
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely say I like the language and planning around restorative reentry meeting. And I don't know that model exactly, but that sounds, really promising, and I would imagine the, direction that we would agree with, as well as the, specific, and I don't know our access to day one, but, just the specific treatment pieces of it. So those are the parts that I really, and most of the rest of it agree with, but that stuck out to me.
Roberto, anything from you? You're still reviewing her?
Yeah, I mean, nothing like immediately. I mean, I think that I think that as Aura said, like there's a lot of it that I like that aims in the same direction that we've been talking about for all of our discipline work. I'm just trying to like wrap my head around. Just trying to like really reframe in my head or reset the perspective of, like I said earlier, allowing our administrators leadway to manage the complexities of these situations. But I also want to, I don't want to lose sight of the long-term impact of what we're trying to achieve here is not just deal with the situation at hand, right? Like someone got caught with drugs, but rather the long-term piece, the educational piece and I like in the beginning of the SOPO policy where it talks about that substance use disorders precedes by early use, and just really center so that what we're trying to do is not punish kids, but just stop that cycle that gets people hooked on substance use disorders, and so
Yep. I think those were some of the comments that, Liz Blackwell Moore had referred me to kind of the new consultant who's, doing some of this work who I had connected with previously. So, I think some of those things where it has a little bit of overarching statement as a lead in the policy, as we've been trying to do, I think would be one of the goals in the rewrite to kind of come back to exactly kind of what you're referencing there, Roberto, about that introductory paragraph, and also calling out kind of the prevention work. It's not just, the like responding to the situation. So, and that was something that was true in our, tobacco and vaping policy as well that we spoke to. So I think in addition to what you mentioned, Aura, which I think is definitely, okay, how do we respond in a way that's not just like suspend the kid for 5 days, right? And it's just managing the situation at hand, as Roberto said, that we have a more kind of, therapeutic, trying to get kids the support they need, right? But that there's also work on the front end and we're kind of centering the issue, in a different way with kind of that introduction just as the basis. So I think those are the themes that really resonate for me in terms of aligning with the work we've been doing. And I agree, this has a little bit of the law enforcement, but I think it is its own thing in its own right, as it was when we took up the tobacco and vaping policy, just in terms of what the, how to bring it consistent with kind of where we're at as a district these days.
Yeah, I would say the tobacco and vaping policy piece that lists out all the resources, I think that would be great to also, have, the South Portland one doesn't have, it mentioned day one, but I really think that's so helpful that, it lists locally all those resources. So I think that would be useful to have in the policy. Because it has both within the schools, right? Like what do we have in Portland schools as well as in the surrounding community?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which is consistent with kind of like the harassment and discrimination policy, right? So
yeah.
Okay. Unless there's over the next month before our last meeting in November, we'll get a rewrite together kind of in service of those goals, right? Kind of a overarching statement, speaking to kind of prevention efforts, reframing how we respond, and then more to your last point, the thought around resources and how we include that as we have in other policies. Okay.
Did we, I'm going to ask about input that we've gotten on this from students, but as you said earlier, I know that we have not done it. I just wonder if there's, have we, I guess just would be good to hear. Maybe we can cue our student reps at the very least. It would be good to just hear from the students, when they read it. I know that we'll probably run it through the Family Partnership Advisory Committee as well, but the student perspective would be good. It's hard for me to contextualize, what these situations look like. Just obviously not being a student or a school staff member. So I'm trying to not draw these hypothetical scenarios in my head and then draw questions from there. and ground myself more like in the reality of our schools right now. So that's why I might be kind of blanking out on.
I mean, I don't know how much it'll contribute to our discussion now. We can kind of bring it back, but a non-hypothetical one is, it kind of combines the two policies we've talked about. Somebody found a THC vape pen on a kid at school. So what do we do? Right. And that was the question. They kind of reached out, knowing, the tobacco, we'd done the work on tobacco vaping, right? But the current procedure looks pretty draconian, right, in terms of the steps. And so they were feeling that it was dissonant a little bit about, what's the response we want to have here? So in the language of suspension, right, where it's like as of last resort. So they were trying to put this one in context with those other two policies, and it was not making sense. So I said, well, that's because we're working on that one on Tuesday night. So
I just have one other thought because of what the chair just mentioned. I don't know that this is a realistic, I don't know if it's realistic for us to get feedback from any students in recovery, but I don't know how, confidentially how we would do that. But I do feel like, a general parent or student perspective is good, but I also just think the language or how that process would play out for any student that has, had substance use disorder and needed or, accessed support. I think that might be helpful, but I don't know. I don't know if there would be a way for a social worker in school or something to get.
Yeah, that was, I was going to say that the social work, there were a couple of social workers that were involved in the tobacco and vaping work. And so I imagine that's not exactly the same, we'll acknowledge, but certainly some folks a little bit closer to it and implicated potentially in some of the response here. So
and I'm sure they've interacted with students that would give. So that might be helpful. But I was just thinking specifically, anyone that as a student had been directly affected by the policy or how staff might respond, and finding them with in possession of a substance. So. Yeah, but that's helpful.
Okay, great. Well, that's helpful for me in terms of my next steps here and to kind of get it organized. So that'll be the policy work I do over November to bring that back to the committee in our late November meeting. All right, we want to move to the transportation policies. So
I should probably unmute myself. So what we're teeing up today is, some of the options and actually a proposed policy EEAB, which is the use of private vehicles for school business. I don't want to go into a ton of details unless you have questions about it, but you're aware that we have significant staffing challenges in the transportation department, and that as a result of that, it's likely that in the near future, we will have situations where we are not able to meet all of our transportation routes or transportation demands as they currently exist. We've communicated that. We've started the process. We learned about it recently, started communicating about it to the community this past weekend. And, we're heavily involved in trying to figure out what our response and protocol will be, so both in terms of like notification and what happens as an alternative for students. So everything from, if they can't get to school, as well as alternative ways to help to get students to school. So those are the kinds of things that we're balancing, right now. So what we included in the board packet for this discussion are a number of things. So one is this model policy EEBB, which is the private vehicle use. And so this is a precursor to anything that we're able to do Alternately, this is something that we were already looking at revising in light of our inability to provide athletic transportation. So this is the actual sort of model policy that's provided by Msma. And then, I have in here a draft of how I envision that policy being articulated for our purposes. And then there's a number of current policies that we have, which have not been revised since the early 90s, but for our purposes, serve, I don't, my current read of them is that they don't need to be revised, but they deal with the use of our vehicles, which I will talk about why that's important at this point for, staff to be able to use our vehicles to transport students. And then, there is the MSMA guidelines and forms, and that is, and I've not done this yet, but that would be the basis for the R that would be associated with policy EEBB, which is the private vehicle use. And so this is, these are the guidelines that MSMA has provided around what are the, circumstances under which somebody can transport kids to school in their own private vehicle, or kids to a soccer game or hockey meet or something along those lines in their own private vehicles. So that's kind of the everything that's in the packet. The options, as I think through this, are sort of obviously the implementation of this policy for the use of private vehicles, because I don't see any circumstances under which we can't, we can do everything that we need to do without also being able to tap into community volunteers, to staff and others to be able to transport kids in these circumstances. And in addition to that, I think the other policy considerations, which I just wanted to put in front of you, is, right now we afford transportation to students who are elementary students who are 1 mile away from school. And so an option for us would be to change that configuration in such a way that it would reduce the number of bus routes that we would need. And so, and we could do that as a temporary measure or something along those lines. But, to say, for example, that we'll only provide transportation to students who are 1.5 miles from school or 2 miles from school or something along those lines. Just for reference, middle school students, the current policy speaks to 2 miles from school. So it would be basically applying the same standard to elementary students, or, a different one, which would be 1.5. The net result of, anything of that nature would be to reduce the number of runs. The other way in which we would reduce the number of routes that are needed, but this is not a perfect solution for a number of things, for a number of reasons, is to shift all of our middle school transportation, or portion, well, it would have to be all of our middle school transportation to Metro. And so the reason that doesn't uniformly help is that all it does is it gives us some flexibility in between runs so that we could potentially double up runs, but it would, it's not like it reduces any of our need for buses and drivers, because we would still need to, have people, or, our kids would be late, is like the long and short of it. Like if we had a bus that, currently it does one elementary, one middle, and one, and then another elementary, if they didn't have to do the middle piece, it just means that they would have time to do a second elementary run, but that would, mean that somebody would be late for school under our current measures. It gives some flexibility, but it doesn't solve any of our issues. So those are the two additional policy options in addition to what we need to do, which is to have a policy that enables us to have staff use their private vehicles for school business. So that's the where I wanted us to focus most of our time today, but I do want to sort of pause and see if you have any broad questions, any questions about those additional policy options, which I'm not bringing to you today, which are the, sort of extending the distances or shifting, just not offering transportation to middle school students.
I have a question about that. I know we don't want to spend a ton of time, but just I'm just wondering in that idea, Superintendent, about the increasing to, did you say 1.5 miles maybe would that be, can you see differences, in different elementary communities as far as like safety of, maybe if kids are walking that, or is that really, are you just guessing that it would be more?
Yeah, we've not operationalized it at all.
Okay.
I think the way that helps is that, some of our schools have, 4 buses that are, East End has 4 buses that are, coming every day, for example. So we might be able, with that, to reduce it to 2 buses.
Yeah,
so
okay.
That, would change the number of runs that we would need to cover.
Okay, so that distance does make that difference that you can see that it would be specifically there, you see, but I'm guessing that.
I mean, 2 miles pretty much means nobody's eligible for transportation.
Yeah. Okay. Because in elementary, they don't live that far. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I just have a question. So under this scenario, where employees are using vehicles, would you, because of the things that have to be in place, like the background checks, would you have people that are designated as possible drivers, or would this be kind of like because I can imagine that making sure that people have the insurance and the background checks and the driving record change. So, I'm just kind of, if you can just talk a little bit about that, how the process.
The foundational pieces are that people have to be vetted in advance and have to meet all of the conditions, a vehicle that is, that has passed inspection, that has enough seat belts, that the person has a clean background, and those pieces. That's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is that the person receiving the transportation has to know and agree in advance to the conditions under which this transportation is being offered. So those are the 2 sort of fundamental conditions that need to be met in order for us to do that.
And that sounds like it's like upfront work, right? To identify as people. Same thing with the students, kind of, I'm assuming some sort of waivers. I think it's there also.
Yeah, that's right.
So as with everything else, understanding the capacity right now is really slim. So just want to acknowledge that also seems like a significant amount of work.
Yeah.
So, but I do like, I like where this is heading. I think it's what you've said to parents that have raised concerns that we're going to work on and move in this direction. So this is moving us there. Just want to make sure that we can do it in a way that that actually alleviates the burden, not increase it on what we already have. Acknowledges a really tight staffing situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it is going to take sort of administrative resources to be able to do that. But it's different from, transportation resources, which we don't have. We just don't have the drivers, but we can get people to, inspect and approve and, process those, those volunteers as we recruit them and get them, on board. I mean, I think that it's important for everybody to understand the risks that are associated with it, that are, not insignificant of, vetted adults riding with kids that they don't know particularly well, sort of in these emergency situations. But, this is where, you have to weigh those, those options. And clearly, as a district, we've never done that because, that would not be, and, the policy itself is loaded with, ideally, kids will be transported by bus, ideally only by staff and all of those things. But we're not at ideally right now. We're in, special territory.
I think just on that point, Superintendent, I do need to voice concern or question whether the same policies that, would happen, or, the same procedures that you would have happen in a school building about, a staff person being alone, with a student. I think that is a really difficult thing in a vehicle, right? You're going to have, I think it does, whether or not it is, directly more of a safety concern for students, not even that so much as, what are the liability issues related in that situation. So I think that is something to, as I know you already said, but
I think that's why a consent by the person being transported is a requirement of it, and obviously, we need to furnish them assurances that we're doing our due diligence on the front end to make sure that the people that we're putting, in a situation of driving their children are people who have clear background checks, good driving records, a viable automobile, all of those things, and they have to say like, okay, this is enough of a, challenge for me to be able to get my child to school that I am going to agree to this, even though it's going to entail my child being alone with, not necessarily alone, in all likelihood with a handful of kids in a, private vehicle being transported to school.
Yeah, but I do hear that's like the weighing things that, I appreciate that this may be a necessary step to make sure kids can access their education. So, so I know you're considering that, and I think just, I did see the paperwork, and I do think that's a necessary step. I think it's just, I'm wrapping my head around it, being something that hasn't been done, right? Hasn't been done in a, setting. We're used to having the settings and the buildings that, have some level of familiarity. So I think that's part of what I'm just trying to sit with, how that sounds.
I've been thinking about this in the transportation tool from school, but I'm assuming this applies also for like co-curriculars.
Yeah.
I think under that, under the co-curricular piece, unofficially, there's been carpooling that's taking place. So to that, in that, under that scenario, it had obviously not with the safeguards and the.
The reason that this is necessary in that context is that, not everybody has access to carpools. And so this is extending our responsibility to transport students, and saying, like those informal, there's nothing that prevents those informal relationships to occur. And as we all know, they do. And in fact, we've had, sort of quasi-formal things. We've got the Deering and PHS letters that basically say, like, I agree to have my kid be in a carpool with, somebody else to go to these particular events or for all fall sports or something along those lines. But that's not the same as saying, we're extending, we're going to make it our business to, in those circumstances where we're unable to provide bus transportation, it's our responsibility to make sure that, that students who don't have access to that carpool, will also be provided with, transportation, assuming again that parents consent to it. Nobody is forcing people to, do that. So if you take a look at the draft of the proposed policy, so there are a few things that I wanted to bring to your attention. I sort of removed a bunch of things that I thought were duplicative of other other things that were there. So, that's the final section of A, B, and C. Those are actually subsumed under what is in this first paragraph. So I felt it was unnecessary to just sort of restate it. That optional Maine driving record is, considered optional under that policy, but I think in the context of of our situation, I don't think it's optional. I think that has to be included in there. So I just wanted to, sort of reality check around that. And then the others, G and H, are, again, sort of either duplicative or unnecessary. If I don't think that we should have a blanket policy saying that no student will be allowed to transport other students on field trips as long as we're actually following, if a student has been vetted, gone through all of these different steps, CAR and all of that stuff, that should be a viable option for us as well. I don't think that, so that's why I sort of took that out of there. So I'd like to bring this to the board. Obviously, we need to run it by our administrators. We need to run it by Drummond Woodson, but I would like to do that, and by MSMA, who's our insurance carrier. We got all of these things from MSMA, have had dialogue with them about it, and so I would like to bring this to the board at the meeting on the 9th.
I'm fine with it coming to the board on the 9th. I don't think I have very many questions around it. Aura, I don't know if you have anything to say.
Superintendent, I just want to clarify. I think you said the other piece you were talking about wasn't to be brought. This is just the staff and their vehicle.
Yeah, I wanted to have a broader conversation about those other two pieces, the extending the miles. We would need to do significant work around that, before we're able to do it. But I just wanted to get a temperature check from you on whether you want us to consider doing something like that. That is something that is going to be, it's going to reduce access to transportation for students based on distance when they currently have an expectation for that.
I will share for that. I guess that was, I didn't feel like we gave you feedback on that. I just had the one question, but I do feel like that may be tough, but I think looking into it, just any option. I mean, the situation sounds so dire that I could see having a couple less routes could, really make a difference, and not have somebody call out and it's like, right, you're going to have to stop route. So that sounds reasonable to me, to try to see how to, not be in such a crisis mode if you could eliminate some of those routes. So that sounds to me like a reasonable step. So,
and what about with the middle school? I think the way that I have been thinking about the middle school is more as an alternative to riding with volunteers. Is like, if somebody would prefer to get a Metro Pass, that we would provide the Metro Pass, or Metro tickets or something along those lines for those rare instances in which so it would not be an alternative, because again, I don't think it reduces our number of buses needed. But in those cases where we, cancel a route, that people would have access to Metro tickets as a way to get to school on those days.
I guess I don't know, Javier, enough about the routes, like where people live for middle school. Like I just don't know if those, I know the high school routes kind of to get to school, but I have no idea, like, you know, is it switching buses? How long? I don't know for students if having the pass is that, like, you know, how many routes are there to get to school on time? Like, I just don't know enough about that. Is that something you'd also have to be looking at, or? Okay. Because just as far as not knowing if that's a reasonable expectation that with the bus pass, families would feel.
You know, so generally, and again, this is not, you know, it's like our middle schools are, you know, one is right next door to Deering. So however the kids are getting to Deering from anywhere in the city using Metro is, you know, that's sort of generally would work. You know, more is generally in the vicinity of Casco Bay, and, you know, King is generally in the vicinity of Portland High.
Yeah.
So, you know, not necessarily, you know, I've not checked this out, but just sort of at a high level thinking about it, there would seem to be, however it is that people are doing that. But we also know that that is not a simple process for our kids, that some kids it takes, you know, 30, 45 minutes, you know, to be able to get to school using Metro. And, you know, there's all sorts of issues that we need to work through, particularly with, you know, younger students in terms of supervision on buses and, you know, things along those lines. So, you know, that's why I prefer to use it as a fallback if, you know, somebody is, you know, if it works for you as an alternative and we have to cancel your bus route on any given day, that you would have access to that as a way of getting to school.
That makes sense to me, because I do think it depends where people live. Yeah, the student's maturity level for middle school, right? Like, so that sounds reasonable to me as if there's no route available. I like the creativity of that. So, yeah, and as far as the policy and the going forward, I feel comfortable with that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
I personally, I like the idea of offering the Metro option even without the immediate, you know, without it being a direct link to not being able to use our transportation. I think we've talked about just having middle schoolers have the Metro passes as well. So separate of how we alleviate the burden on our transportation system, I think just offering the Metro option to middle schoolers, I would support that as a practice. So just want to put that out there because we had talked about that.
A fairly expensive option to just blanket do that. So
yeah, I would assume that there would be a cost to it. Yeah. But in general, I guess what I was saying is even without the need to lessen the transportation burden, I would support us having middle schoolers access Metro. And I guess the other part that I thought would be, you know, I don't even know if this is part of the discussion, but in the past we've had the conversation of redistricting within the context of our transportation needs. I know that our enrollment is kind of what guides us in a redistricting conversation. So I don't know if down the line that is something that we'll take on. The redistricting is something that always kind of surfaces as a question, but certainly in the last 5 years we've not done it other than rejoin the temporary lines that we have for Ocean. So yeah, how does that play in? That, as I said earlier, as capacity goes, that seems to be like the worst option of all, because that does take like an immense amount of capacity from every aspect of the organization. So so do you feel you have, at least for the private vehicles and then for the long-term look, you have enough to go back and work on it. All right, good.
Okay.
Do you, just given moving it from committee to the board, should there be, I mean, you both indicated support for moving it to the board. I don't know if we should have a formal action to that effect.
Yeah, and I guess it's this the EEBB version for PPS policy that will motion to send to the full board. All right, moves. I'll second. We're in favor. We'll indicate. That's unanimous. All right.
Thank you.
Sorry, just finishing the note on this. Okay. So we can take just a moment here to just kind of look back. I put together kind of what we have accomplished, just kind of in a summary, and, you know, could be your jumping off point there, Roberto, for the board report. So, you know, this does reflect pretty much what we set out in terms of policy work. You know, we were, you know, as this board calendar year started, we were engaged in the initial work around the discipline revisions, and we're beginning the groundwork for the law enforcement policy community engagement that we had. And then, you know, saw those two big bodies of work through, you know, up through the last board meeting, with a couple of these last policies still not quite there. But and there were a couple that we picked up along the way as well, in terms of the compulsory attendance and immunization policy, to be able to get those updated with the, you know, current legislation. So I, you know, that's just kind of a rehashing of what we've gotten done as a group over the past while. So if there's any.
It's a lot of work, and I think it's important to note that some of these were like really substantive changes. It wasn't just some cleanup language.
Yeah, I mean, KLGB is new. It didn't exist.
KLGB is new.
Yep.
Yeah, it's wild. It doesn't feel like a year, man. It doesn't feel like a year's worth of work. Feels like 3 years worth of work.
Mm-hmm.
And when was ACA last year? We did it before the.
Yeah, I mean, nominally, it was approved in October, so it was like in the 2020, 2021 school year,
Yeah.
but nominally it was before, like it was, or before you joined the board, actually, right? So that was approved in October of last year, because we came back, you know, and I think the policy, and even Roberto, before you were formally on the policy committee, even, so you were chair at that point.
Yep.
So anyway, you know, it just reflects from essentially January, because we didn't meet in December. But, you know, it was, you know, there was a fair bit of continuity from your involvement in the policy committee previously, as board chair, Roberto, as you and Emily kind of switched roles, and, you know, bringing you on, Aura, and certainly Mr. Irish for the time he was with us. I was curious a little bit. I mean, we don't have, and we can come back to this in November, but, you know, if there's anything from the board's perspective around potential priorities, and, you know, thinking about what's the work plan for the committee, you know, in 2021, 2022, if out of this, there are any kind of emerging priorities that folks had. You know, we had been engaged in some extremely exhilarating book reviews to get all of our policies kind of updated and refreshed. So that was a body of work we can resuscitate. Other things that have come up on my radar, I think one priority I'd want to engage around is re-engaging around the harassment and discrimination policies for staff, including a new law around workplace bullying. So I think that's, you know, kind of a substantive body of work that I think should be on our radar for the coming board policy year. And then, you know, I think there have been, out of the Family Partnership Advisory Committee meetings, there's the potential of kind of revisit, you know, there needs to be some further engagement around the dress code policy. there was the law enforcement conversation went quickly to dress code policy, more than the law enforcement policy there. So, so I could see that one as potentially being something that is worth spending some time with again, even though I know it was, it wasn't that long ago that was updated. So,
Aaron, could I just clarify when you say the harassment policy? So would that be adding to the policy that already is, or is it a newer piece that's specifically having to do with?
So there's an existing one, ACAB.
Oh, ACAB. Okay.
Yep. So ACAA was the student-facing one. ACAB is the staff-facing one.
Okay. So there is one, but talking about, what was the law you referenced? It was about bullying?
Well, yeah, there's a new law that we're, just shared around workplace bullying. I don't know how much it'll overlap. I'm not super familiar with it yet, but I think, just as we had a harassment and discrimination policy for students before, I think, took the step back of, does this reflect who we want to be as an organization now? And certainly that came up a lot as we rolled out, amongst our staff of color and other staff, when we rolled out the Educator of Color report, kind of at the same time that we were rolling out the harassment and discrimination policy for students. There were lots of questions, deservedly so, about, well, what if I'm having experiences like this? What's my process? Who do I report to? And so we have some interim things in place. We've communicated things. So it's not like there isn't an avenue to address those currently. But I think, we owe it to kind of step back in the same way we did tobacco and vaping, and trying to bring substance use and consistency in our approach, that, this one merits the same kind of attention.
Makes sense.
Okay. And that's it then for this evening.
Yeah, I guess the last thing that I'll say to what we said a moment ago, I don't remember what else came out of the Family Partnership Advisory Committee, but I do remember the dress code conversation. I thought, with all the substantive changes that we've made to these policies and looking at this list, we heard a lot, and I know board member Bondo, almost for every policy, and she's been really consistently bringing up, making sure that we understand the implementation part of it. So I just wish, or I would hope that the policy committee over the next year, also, it feels like we cram in so much work on the policies, and I think that some of us might not really be able to articulate to community members how the implementation takes place. So maybe over the next year, the policy committee, and this is more for us, by the way, not for Aaron and Javier to work on, but maybe us as policy committee members could just really dig in more and try to figure out how do we help each other understand the implementation of these policy changes. That takes, yeah. I'm not gonna start to guess as to what it'll take for us to achieve that. But clearly, when we talk to people in the community and we try to express to them the spirit behind these policy changes, we should all be able to articulate that coherently. And then also understand that it takes change to implement these things, and it takes resources, particularly when we have policies like ACA. So I think, yeah, it's just my wish for the next year for the policy committee, especially when we do such substantive changes, so we can then communicate it clearly to folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what that makes me think of is we have some mechanisms around reporting on outcomes and expectations that have been kind of committed to through the equity policy, as well as within some of these additional policies, right? So that'll be one lens to to monitor change and impact, in addition to having the conversations about investments, budget, right, and then kind of the strategic priority work that we're implementing. I think we think about the priority 2, as we call it, the kind of whole student equity work, being super aligned to be beginning the work to build the capacity to kind of fulfill these policies, right, and have the impact on students we want. So continuing to bring light and focusing on some of that either through this committee or, through board focus, discussions with the whole board, I think could, be really valuable.
Oh, a board focus on, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
All right. So is that all that we had to discuss on the reflection of the committee work?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just teeing it up for you to have the report for whenever we do that in November. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I think it's November that we'll do it. Great. Yeah, it'll be a nice lengthy report.
Yeah.
I want to, just, also just commend the work that the committee has done, and obviously the work that Aaron has done to keep us on track to get through. I mean, that's a really substantive body of work around, both the law enforcement and the discipline policies, and to sort of sprinkle in things like transportation today and all of these other legally required policies. So, this has been an incredibly successful year for the policy committee. I also think that, Aaron's suggestions for what is the body of work going forward is right on. And I do, as unsexy as it is to sort of focus on the book by book, policies, sort of just being confronted with, what is included in today around the transportation policy, that those policies haven't really been revised. They were passed in 84, they were revised in 92, and nothing has happened to them since. It's like, holy mother, that is like, we have a lot of things, and those they're fine, they're not great, but they'll work for us. But, those are the kinds of things that are sitting out there that may not be fine, that needs to happen.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Aaron, you and Javier, and Jake's work. I mean, just during this time of like constant being in crisis mode too, this is a big deal to have done this deep work. I mean, this would be challenging and not, whack-a-mole time as it has been, right? So just, yes, big appreciation for doing this deep, meaningful work in such a time of already your plates being overflowing. So, yeah, just appreciating and knowing the impact over, coming generations that these changes will make. So it's significant. So thank you.
Indeed. I still chuckle every time I see August 26, 1992 in our policies as the last date revised. My mom's birthday.
That was a big year, Roberta. For some reason,
everything got done that day.
Happened that year because we keep finding that one. So
I know. I see every time I see it, I'm like, wow, that must have been one of those 3 a.m. board meetings. They did all the books. It's
either that or they brought all the books in one, sitting and just said like, pass this.
Yeah, approved. Yeah, I won't reiterate what was said, but yeah, it really has been an incredible year. A lot of these policies. I mean, last board meeting when we passed our law enforcement KLG, I think we talked about it. A lot of these policies were the work that we committed to doing, well over a year ago. And it's amazing that we were able to do it in one calendar year in this committee. And I'm pretty sure all of these substantive policy revisions, we should all be really proud of the process that we took to gather input and feedback on them. We have some good systems in place to do that, even with the current environment. So we should be really happy about that. I've been talking a lot about our family engagement policy and the Family Partnership Advisory Committee, and I can't tell you how proud I am of how we have worked that process to gather input from stakeholders. Yeah, so I'm proud of that.
Yep.
All right, if we're all set, I'd like to get us done right on time. So if we are all done, I'd get out in, if we can have a motion to adjourn our meeting. All right, and I'll second. All those in favor indicate, and we've adjourned at 7:29 p.m.